Hello everybody, welcome to a new video. So today's video, I'm just going to waffle a little bit, as well as teach you guys, well, just give some tips and tricks on how to learn a track quicker. So this week we're at Belle Isle, and yeah, this track is really difficult, especially in the GTP. I've driven it in the bit in the GTP, and it's still quite hard. No, it's very hard in the GTP, but in the LMP2 it's still quite hard. A lot easier though. So if you're a GTP driver and you're like, I don't know, let's just say you're not having fun on this track, try it in the P2. It feels really nice. I quite like this track now at the P2. I didn't really like it with the GTP though. So this track, this guide is going to be about, how do we progress into faster lap times? And the first thing that I want to mention is active reset. If you don't have this, what you need to do is you need to go to Control, scroll down, and on the right you have right here. We can set active reset start save start point. So we press that when we want to set the point at which we want to reset at, and then the active reset run is when we press it, we get spawned in on that point. So let's just run through the guide. So let's just run through the. We'll just put this in the background, and I'll be talking. So let me go into chase. So the first thing I normally do is I just test out the breaking points, and I try and instill good habits. So for good habits, I mean I'll never try and overlap. So getting on the throttle too early because I'm being impatient. Like I always trail brake right towards the apex, making sure I don't coast. Because the first thing I want to test is how much longitudinal grip I can use without me, going right off the track. So this track has taken me a little bit longer to learn compared to others, just because of the difficult nature of it. But yeah, the first thing I always try is trail brake right towards the apex of the corner and see how much you overslow by. If it literally feels like you are crawling, well then that's a sign that you need to brake later, and it starts to improve the braking points at every corner, because you start to realize, okay, I'm braking too early, or maybe I'm braking too late. So if you're braking too late, the symptom is usually you'll start to overwhelm the fronts and you'll start to get understeer, or you might get oversteer. It just depends on what you do during the braking zone. I think I had a video covering some sections of that. If you want to watch it, it's called Overslowing at the Apex in Iracing. Give it a watch if you have that problem. But anyway, so yeah, right now I'm just testing out longitudinal grip. I'm just seeing how much I can brake towards the apex and seeing my minimum speed. If it feels like I'm crawling, then I push the braking zone forward and forward and forward until it feels like I've nailed the braking zone and I'm trail braking right towards the apex and nothing feels too slow. I would guide you through how I actually start to remember the track, but I feel like everyone has their own way of doing that. Some people just run laps, which is what I sort of do. I don't really watch track maps and track guides. I used to, but not anymore. I sort of just feel it out on my own, because sometimes, when you watch other people, they can instill bad habits, especially if they're not very good. So you have to be careful of who you pick, and right now there's no one really doing lap guides, from what I'm aware of anyway, on iRacing or like even hot laps, so I tend to not watch them. But yeah, and then the next thing I start to do is I start to incorporate more techniques that I am aware of. So let's say steering with the brake and not the steering wheel. I start to try and balance that out, and if we go into cockpit view, you'll probably see me do it a lot. Yep, so you can see there I'm using the brake to turn the car and not the steering. So I start to combine the longitudinal grip. I've ticked that box off, and now I'm trying to do my good habits of where I'm using as little steering angle as possible throughout these corners, whilst also getting the maximum rotation. So that's the second step that I always do. And the next step, I would say, is just to test the car. So what I mean by that, you've probably heard of the term of fishing for grip. And what it is, so you can see, like, if let's say in this corner. Okay, yeah. So you can see, I'm sort of jabbing at the wheel. You see how it's not just like a hold of where I just choose a steering angle. It's more of like you sort of wiggle almost at the wheel. Because what I want to test is, if I give it more steering angle right now, what does the car do in response to us? Does it give me understeer, or does it even turn even more? If the answer is it turns even more, then it means I can take more entry speed, which is useful, right? Because that means you can take more entry speed, gain lap time. So fantastic. If the car understeers, it tells me that I'm near the limit. It doesn't mean I'm at the limit, but it tells me I'm near the limit. So that's when I start to get comfortable. So I start introducing repetition. So now that I know that the car's relatively near the limit, I'll just keep going through the same corner and doing the same thing. And if there's fine adjustments that need to be made, I'll make them right now. So I will start to, let's say if I'm braking too early, so if I turn the steering angle more and the car responds better to it, so I get more rotation, then maybe I'll brake later. And then I'll test, okay, again, does the car want to turn if I give it a little bit more steering angle? If the answer is yes again, rinse and repeat. And it'll get to the point where it doesn't. And that's when you know you've hit the nail on the head and you're pretty close to ideal. But of course, there's so many other factors in like lap time, including like how much steering angle are you using? Are you winding lock to 180 degrees? Of course, it's very subtle. People, when they talk about understeering with too much lock on, they usually demonstrate it with like 300 degrees of like lock on. It can actually be very subtle. It can be a tiny bit too much. So be very careful. You need to, when you turn in on these, when you learn a track, make sure you have like very relaxed hands, so you can feel that point of where the wheel starts to get lighter. As soon as it starts to get lighter, back off just a smidge and really feel out that point of where it reaches its peak force feedback. So make sure you are not clipping at the wheel. If it's clipping during corners, turn it down. I really like strong FFB, but that is crucial. If my wheel clips during mid corner, I will not be fast, because I will not be able to tell if I'm on the grip limit. So it'll literally just be a guessing game. So make sure your FFB is set properly. Of course, that's not very just related to learning new tracks, but it's also just, it does still apply, but it's also quite general. But it's something that's not talked about enough. Make sure your wheel is not clipping. If it's clipping during mid corner and it's like sustained, sometimes if it's just like a little flick, it's not too bad, although I'd rather just have it none. Only if I go over curbs, then that's fine. But if I'm mid corner, then I do not want any clipping. If it's clipping, turn it down. So that's the second thing. That's the third thing I do when I'm learning tracks. And the one thing that I would always recommend not to do is choose turning in points. I've never understood why people do that. I can see if you were like, maybe, I don't know, you were doing a 24-hour race and it's literally dry all the time, or the same conditions. It's just the same condition, like Sebring, the 12-hour Sebring, that was literally just dry the entire time. It was the same conditions, right? So what you could do is you could probably just remember reference points for the turn and everything. You'd be very consistent. But I'm saying if you're not on pace, do not do that, because you are just going to stay at the same point all the time if you're not changing anything. You need to be changing your driving if you want to get faster. So when you're learning a track, do not apply these turn in points, these braking. I mean, you can do braking points. Make sure you do them. They're very important. By all means, do braking points, but don't do turn in points. It's a bunch of bollocks, because you will be changing them so dynamically as you learn the track anyway. Once you find more efficient lines, once you find better lines, if there's bumps that you need to avoid, etc., etc. That's why I just don't go off turning points. Even when I know a track very well, I still don't go off turning points, because the track conditions change a lot. So it changes very, very subtly when you turn. And so that's why I just don't use them, because it means if I'm off pace even by a little amount, it means I'll stay at that pace the entire stint, because I am using reference points as driving. I always drive off feel and not just reference points all the time. So that would be my other tip as well. But yeah, so, and then I start to incorporate what I was trying to explain in quite a few videos ago. It's called Advanced Trail Braking Guide, Iracing, and it's basically how we control minute levels of oversteer and understeer during a corner. And I think if I was to demonstrate it, it would be this corner. So let's take a look. Just look at my brake trace and we'll see if I did it. Yeah, so you can see here that you see how the rate of release is changing? That's because when I feel oversteer, I'm increasing the rate of release, and when I'm understeering, I decrease the rate of release. So I start to incorporate that later on, once I feel like I'm near the limit. Of course, I'm still like 2 seconds off pace on my fastest, but the optional sectors are, I think the optional sectors is about a second off pace. So that's not too bad now. So it's just like little things I need to do. I think the number one corner that I suck at is either that one that I just went through, or this whole section. So what I'd do here, if I was learning the track, I would watch the replay back and I would spot more efficient lines. So instantly I can see is that maybe I should be a bit further over to the left at this point and then sort of dive in here. Because if I did that, I'd have more track limit here, so I could actually have a more efficient line. Yeah, and then here it also, I feel like I'm overslowing here and on this part of the circuit, and then because of that I get on the throttle too early because I'm getting impatient, and it causes me to really hesitate on the throttle, which is costing me a lot of time. So yeah, I'd definitely recommend looking at replay. I'd also go over to Garage 61 or some free telemetry, and I'd compare myself against other drivers. Usually I just watch telemetry and not any track guide videos, as I mentioned before, because telemetry actually gives you real-time information about what you need to change, and that's so much easier to understand and compare compared to videos where you are guessing where they're braking, because you don't have those identical reference points. Remember, you could only be a tenth of a second behind or in front of them, so when you look back at their replay, it's going to be almost invisible to know the differences. So you need to be using telemetry. So that's what I'd go to next. So let's say if I hit a plateau, so I've done how many laps? 11 laps, and I feel like I'm plateauing at 122. Then what I'd do is I'd take a step back away from this track, and I'd go to telemetry, and I'd just compare and just like note down in my head. You don't need to note it down physically, just in your head, where you think you're going wrong and where the telemetry is showing that you're going wrong. So let's say it was 10.5 or whatever, or Blanchimont, and I don't know how you'd go wrong in Blanchimont at Spa, but let's say if it was, then I'd note it down mentally, and then the next time I'd go through Blanchimont, I'd made sure that I'd applied that change. So that's the next tip. So to recap, because we're going to wrap this up, first of all, just get a feel of the track. You don't need to be doing anything stupid at first. Literally just throttle brake right towards the apex once you know the general layout. See if you're overslowing. If you're overslowing, push the braking zone further forward, and then once you get to that point of where you get understeer, dial it back, and then you should be pretty much ideal. Next thing I'd try is then fishing for grip. So we test if I turn the steering block a bit more during the corner, does the car react to it? The next thing I'd test is then, not test, but I'd implement is remember to steer with the brake and not the steering, because so many people when they learn a new track, it's like every technique goes out the window. You need to make sure that you remember your techniques. So steer with the brake, not the steering. Then the fourth technique I'd implement is doing the understeer and oversteer control on the brake pedal. Once you've done that, then you will be very close to the limit. Then once you've done that, you need to go into telemetry and see how far off the pace you are. If you're about a second off, that's not too bad. That's actually a decent starting point, even though it seems a lot. You can really get it down, because there'll be like a corner where you're like missing out on 3/10 alone, and then the next corner it's like a tenth, and then the next corner it's like a tenth, and you'll be able to find that. So go into telemetry, compare, and see where you're losing time or gaining time, because that means you're doing good in some sectors. So see where you're losing time, and then mentally note it in your head, so then change the next corner, because there's no point even guessing. If you've hit a plateau, go and take a break, do some telemetry work, come back, and then implement. That's what it should be. Learn, implement, and then race it. So that's the cycle that you should take. But yeah, that was the whole video. I will be doing the track guide for this, for Belle Isle. I don't know if I'll be doing it in a GTP, if I'm being honest, because I was driving the P2 then, and it just feels so much fun to drive. It feels much easier, just funner to drive. So I think I'm going to do it in the P2, but you never know, it might change. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'm sorry I haven't been very active. I've had some family issues, so I've just been away. But yeah, thank you very much.